Hey, out there, internet land, I am finally going to start the first of my new series. I don't really know exactly what I'm going to call it yet, but it's a series where I'm going to go over some recollection of old bands that I used to listen to when I was like a kid, teenager, and some of the bands I even discovered as an adult that rather they're more nostalgia bands or like just new ones that came out. Maybe I don't know if I'll really do any of the newer ones or not, because most of the new bands just only sound good for the short term. They don't really have any like longevity in regarding how good they sound and keeping up that legacy and stuff like many bands have been known for over time. But when it comes to musical legacies, there is one band that really distinguishes them compared to any other big time band out there, and that is the Fab Four, the Beatles. And this is going to be part one. I mean, I'm probably not going to do the entire Beatles review on this video. I'll probably like maybe just in this part one, I'll just basically be talking about their Silver Beatles stuff and the stuff they had up until about 1964 when they first came to America, and then I will maybe do like a part two and maybe even a three, because the Beatles, they were a band for 10 years, but all those 10 years they were a band, they really did transform and had like multiple eras. They didn't just have like a solid decade where they stuck to the one thing they did when they first became a band. They transformed, they changed their appearances. Even their style of music was different by there's a tremendous difference between the Beatles in 1965 and the Beatles in 1969. I mean, just goes to show you how much stuff can evolve even in like a very short-lived period of time. There's just no really way you could really stop it or anything. But anyway, I am going to well, maybe first I should probably say how I learned about the Beatles. Because you see, I am 38 years old, and the Beatles were way before my time. In fact, I wasn't even alive when John Lennon was. He was shot by Mark David Chapman 7 years before I was born, or almost 7 years before I was born. I was born November 6th of 1987, so yeah, the Beatles were definitely before my time, but I'm going to go on ahead and just tell you how I actually found out about the Beatles. Well, you see, my dad used to be a very big Beatle nut. I mean, before I was born, the Beatles were a big favorite band of his, along with Bruce Springsteen, the Rolling Stones. But the Beatles were the ones he liked the most. They were his favorite band up until about like maybe 93, 94. And he ended up eventually liking the Stones over the Beatles. But anyway, my dad had a whole record collection of Beatles vinyls. They were the records. They weren't the CDs or the tapes. They were records. And we had a record player, back when I was like really, really young, like when we lived in a house in Kankakee, Illinois, the K3. My dad had a record player, and he had like loads of Beatles albums. Now, I kind of started out liking Bruce Springsteen. I mean, I had my awkward moments listening to Bruce. I mean, hearing certain songs, but to this day, I still like the song a lot, Atlantic City. There's just, I don't know, maybe because it reminds me a little bit of Pearl Jam, Eddie Vedder, the way Bruce Springsteen executed his vocals on that track. But anyway, beside the point, we're talking about the Beatles, not Bruce. But anyway, and then finally, like, when I was when I was 6, I think, I decided to give the Beatles a go. My dad was just kind of like, we were just like hanging out in his room and stuff, and my dad like pops in the album Rubber Soul, the album version, and it starts with "I've Just Seen a Face" with Paul on the lead vocals. And that's when my interest in the Beatles just took off right there. They sounded so catchy, man. It even flattered me to even learn eventually that I was actually named after John Lennon. Well, partially. I mean, since I'm Jonathan, not entirely John, I get that. My mom decided to name me Jonathan after King Saul's son in the Bible, and on top of that, just so it can be a little bit more customable. And I mean, I spent my summers here in Southwest Virginia where I currently live. When I'd come down here for the summer, they'd call me Jonathan. When I was up north going to school and stuff, the people up there called me John. And it's still kind of that way, but typically I usually introduce myself as John nowadays because there's more and more Jonathans coming into the world. And this area here in the mountains, there are probably more Jonathans than Johns anyway, so. Now, anyway, yeah, Rubber Soul was the first Beatles album that I listened to, and even the song Norwegian Wood, that one was catchy. You Won't See Me by Paul, another rockish tune. And, yeah, that's how I ended up liking the Beatles. My dad even used to have this, like, little thing on a video cassette that he taped years, like, I mean, it was like the 1982 complete Beatles program, but I think he, like, taped it in, like, 88 or 89 when I was a baby in Florida. I think he might have taped it down there. But yeah, I used to watch that quite a bit, and it intrigued me on how much of a history and behind-the-scenes stuff that the Beatles had in order to be such brilliant, greatest musical masterpiece known in musical history. I mean, I'm pretty sure these days there are plenty of music classes in grade schools that teach the Beatles. I mean, it happens. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's not even just in high schools where people are trying out for the choir and just singing these songs in the choir. I mean, I'm pretty sure there are actual classes that teach the Beatles as part of their assignments. And that generation, I guess, is kind of lucky for that, but other than that, I'm just glad I don't go to school anymore. I'm glad I went to school and graduated. But yeah, the Beatles, I mean, see, a lot of my friends didn't even really listen to the Beatles all that much when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I would listen to the Beatles. I would listen to a lot of this stuff, and I didn't feel ashamed of it either because a lot of kids my own age kind of made fun of me because of my condition and stuff. I'll go on ahead and talk a little bit about the history of the Beatles and how they became a band based on what I know from watching the complete Beatles and the other video series like Anthology and reading about it in books and stuff. Now, many people think that the first drummer of the Beatles before Ringo was Pete Best. Well, that ain't really true because they had like 2 or 3 drummers before Pete. They had this one drummer named Johnny. I can't remember his last name, but yeah, he started out as their drummer. Stu Sutcliffe was more or less a former member of them, but sadly he had a lot of emotional baggage and or demons he was dealing with and drug problems. He ended up dying at such a young age, and it's very, very sad that happened to him. But yeah, Stu Sutcliffe, he was in the initial stages of the band. And of course, George Harrison and Paul McCartney were best friends as kids. And Paul was hanging out with John a lot in school. Even though, Paul was like more well-behaved and disciplined, loved following the rules of the faculties at the school, whereas John Lennon, on the other hand, was a lot more badly behaved. He was a little defiant and stuff. He would go against the rules, was a slacker. Heck, I was in high school too, and it's kind of partially, maybe more or less, the reason why I'm on SSI and stuff, because I didn't really do my studies and stuff like probably I should have and all that, and I had a lot of other backfires along with. But anyway, yeah, I'm rambling on about myself when I should be talking about the Beatles. Anyway, yeah, John and Paul were hanging out. They decided to form a band. Paul already knew George and knew that he could play the guitar because ever since George got his first guitar at the age of 13, he was just constantly fiddling with it, playing it, trying to learn song from song, and he just developed a talent for playing the guitar. Paul immediately said, "I'll get my friend George," and he introduced George to John, and they already had the 3 founding members, and all they needed was a drummer from here, and like I said, they got multiple drummers. I think they had at least 2 other drummers before Pete Best. I know one of them, his first name was Johnny, but I can't remember his last name, but they had them, and that didn't really go so well when they wanted to start doing shows and concerts and announcing themselves to more parts of the world, so they somehow learned of Pete Best, and they knew that he could play the drum in a rock and rollish style. Like, I mean, hey, he could have even been Chuck Berry or Elvis Presley at the time's drummer, because he was just so great with the rhythm of the drum. But as to why Pete Best was fired, well, I'll get to that later. But they find Pete Best, they recruit him to be their drummer. They become the Silver Beatles. Pete Best became their drummer, and they became the Silver Beatles. And when they became the Silver Beatles, they mostly would just do covers of songs. They didn't really write any of their own material at first. They just kind of did along the lines of Johnny Cash and would just do covers of songs that have already been written. And when they would like go out and do all this, they would perform at shows, they would perform at clubs, bars, pubs, a lot of variety of places. Even I think they even like went. I don't know if they really went to India. They might have. I don't know, but nevertheless, though, I do know that they became the Silver Beatles. I mean, they didn't really get very much hype. I mean, people were a little bit more, I don't know, restraint when they were watching them as the Silver Beatles, and they weren't really quite as popular as they would be later on. And here's another thing that happened. Whenever they would like go out in public, you know, like you see like the British invasion. Man, my words. Okay, you recall the British invasion from 1964, 1965, and you see how woo, like how the girls would do in the audiences and stuff of those. Well, anyway, they mainly only did that to Pete Best. They wouldn't really do it to John, George, or Paul. In fact, Paul, I think, even said somewhere that he didn't like the fact that Pete Best was an attraction stealer. See, he didn't really like show off at these girls or anything. They just found him to be the cutest of the bunch in terms of physical attractiveness. They just, you know, they go crazy about Pete, and they acknowledge him even though he's just a drummer, and they're just basing him on superficial material here. And Paul saw that, and he knew that was just going to break their reputation if that kept up. And they didn't think his drumming skills were adequate enough for the new style they wanted to do afterwards, so that they can really actually get popular. So they fire Pete Best, and they learn of Richard Starkey, otherwise known as Ringo Starr, and he was already a drummer of this other band, but I can't quite remember the name of it. But they learn about Ringo, and they discover his band and the stuff he performed, and they recruited him. And I tell you, John, George, and Paul were tickled to death that he accepted to be their drummer. They were finally getting that recognition and cheer they were wanting. They switched their wardrobe. You know, they no longer had that greaser look and the leather coats. Now they have the longer hair that's messy. They wear suits and ties or various dress uniform outfits, and they play their guitars, the bass, Paul's iconic bass guitar that looks a little bit like a violin or something. It's one of those unique basses. Yeah, I'm surprised nobody else has ever used it in any other bands. I guess they probably just want it to be iconic for Paul. But yeah, they get that hype recognition they wanted. In 1962, 63, they released a few albums and records and got some sales, and they eventually met up with their manager, Brian Epstein, who was actually a very interesting guy who existed in the 60s. He was he was a business owner of this furniture that he inherited from his parents. And they sold furniture at that store and everything. And while at the same time running the furniture store, he was managing the Beatles, making sure they got paid and stuff. He didn't oversee exactly everything they did, but he kept in great touch with them. He made sure they got a paycheck. He just kind of did a whole bunch of stuff for them and all that, and it was probably a great thing that Brian Epstein was the manager of the Fab Four, because he did a lot of great work and then eventually just got a bigger reward. And I'm pretty sure even, well, he said in an interview that he never really made more money while being the Beatles managers and all that, but I know if it weren't for him becoming the Beatles manager, he never would have been popular or exposed himself. And see, this part one I'm only doing 1962 to 64. Like I said, I'm gonna probably do the mid-era later, so I don't have to talk about Brian Epstein for the whole vlog for this, because yeah, I'm only doing the early stuff. But yeah, the Beatles, they even came out with the song Love Me Do in 1962, was a massive big hit in Europe. They even did other songs like Please Please Me and I Should Have Known Better. Whoa, whoa, I should have known better than a girl like you, that you would love all the things that you do. Or, I can't really remember the exact lyrics, but yeah. And when I tell you that I love you, whoa, you're gonna say you love me too. Not really doing my current singing voice when I amateur style a lot of the stuff, but I don't even really always do that. But nonetheless, though, yeah, that, and they even had other hits at the time. They had This Boy. That's a really good song. I even like that Free as a Bird EP that had like Christmas Time Is Here Again and Free as a Bird, the demo version with John's recorded vocals. And they even made like other songs that featured those samples, like Real Love and the other Now and Then. Yep, that's it. But yeah, like I was saying though, the Beatles did have plenty of hits like the This Boy, like I said, it was on that Free as a Bird, like the demo version of it. And they like even were doing those bloopers, like, because they were like in the middle of the studio, like all singing it. And even George sang the song Do You Want to Know a Secret, although I think John and Paul still wrote it. They had George sing it. And I Want to Be Your Man with Ringo on the lead vocals, and that's another good song. See, that's the thing, what John and Paul would do, kind of like with Oasis, with Noel Gallagher, like writing all the songs but having his brother Liam sing them. It was kind of a similar thing, with John and Paul at times. Like, if they couldn't really match it in a pleasing vocal sounding way, they'd get either George or Ringo to sing it, or sometimes even over other disputes, and the public eye may just not like to hear John or Paul in the lead vocals, so they get either their other two opposite to sing it. But George was an amazing talented vocalist. He was the shyest of the bunch, even though he could be a little bit, he'd have you walking on eggshells. According to what some people said about it. I mean, I don't know if he really would have people walk. I mean, people did say that George did have just as much flaws as Paul McCartney did. And they grew up as children, and I don't know the exactly entire legacy story, but I mean, I've read about it, but some of this stuff I might be off because I haven't recently really kept up with any of it. But yeah, those are some of the hits they had from 1962, 63. I even like the song Anna, Go to Him. That's a really good song. And the song Chains, that's another good song. I think George sang that one. Even though, like I said, John and Paul wrote it. And, Hard Day's Night. Yeah, we got to really get into this. They actually made a movie of this album too, where they had that elderly man claiming to be Paul's grandfather or something, and he was just chasing him around on a train and stuff. But yeah, Hard Day's Night did have some good tunes in it. It's a really good album from start to finish. songs like Things We Said Today by Paul, and I Love Her, that's another Paul lead vocal track. And then, of course, Anytime at All, that was a pretty good song off the album. And, I know they did the song I Want to Hold Your Hand, and that's the first song they did in America when they invaded America with the British invasion, along with the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, Herman's Hermits, and the Hollies, a whole bunch of other ones, you know, the British invasion they refer to it as. Yeah, forgive my little mild stuttering, but yeah, that happened. And, you know, like I was saying, you know, the first song they performed in America was I Want to Hold Your Hand. And of course, I think their first song, like when they had Ringo as a part of the group, the first song they released and like did on their own without it being a cover or anything like that was Love Me Do. And trying to think here of some other stuff that happened with the Beatles, like 1962, 64. Oh gosh. I can't really think of anything else to say at the moment, but I guess I'll probably go on ahead and wrap up this first edition of my music reviews, bands and stuff that I listen to and that my friends listened to and everything back in the day. And I will be back with more content later. Maybe my next video, however, will probably be me talking about what I think of Resident Evil Requiem. I got the game and I've played it, but I'm not going to play it on this channel for a while. But I will tell you my input and interpretations of it and stuff and all that, what I think of it. But anyway, have a great evening and thanks for watching if you chose to stick through the whole thing.